Otra vez tengo el gusto de volver a presentar en este festival, de volver a dar la bienvenida a un premiado de honor del año 2016, si no estoy equivocado. Una de las personas, en mi opinión, más influyentes de los últimos años como creador de videojuegos, líder de algunos de los juegos también más interesantes de esta generación de consolas, ahora hablaremos de ellos, y con una trayectoria larguísima, con lo cual, porque empezó muy joven, podemos hablar también un poco de la historia de este género tan apasionante de la cultura. Welcome to the Fun and Serious Game Festival, Harvey Smith. How are you doing?
Hey, good to see you again. God, I wish I was in Bilbao having pinchos. Last time I was there, I was with Sebastian Mitton, the art director for Arcane, and we had just such a good time. We had flown over from Lyon, France, and it's a lovely city. I'm doing fine, I guess, as far as like, you know, living at home and talking to people through my computer. It's been great for D&D campaigns and for online gaming and all of that. But I'm ready for a vaccine. I'm ready to get out to have cocktails and food with friends and
back to living, right?
Back to living. And Texas is being crushed right now by the virus. So yeah, so good to see you and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. You're back in Texas then. I wasn't sure if you were living in the US or France now.
Yeah. So I Dishonored 1, I lived in Austin, Texas, but I traveled a lot back and forth to Europe with Rafael Colantonio, collaborating between the two studios, Lyon and Austin. And then for Dishonored 2, I just moved fully to Lyon and lived there with those guys. Dinga Bakaba, Sebastian Mitton, all of them working on Deathloop right now. But I moved there for 4 years to work on Dishonored 2 with them, while Raf and company did Prey back in Austin, Texas. And then at the end of Dishonored 2, I moved back to Austin to work on something else. So yeah, it's over for me, that period of living in Lyon. It was 4 years long. I loved it. It's a beautiful city. The food is amazing. People are great. But I'm back in Texas.
Well, let's get to let's get to business. I was talking with Warren Spector only, I was about to say an hour ago, but no, we recorded that a couple of days ago. But well,
okay.
You have a similar approach to game design. So I'm throwing you the same question that I made to him. What you do is. As games are immersive themes, are games where you are given a situation and the game is about finding out how you're going to react to it, pretty much. There's of course, there's a plot, there's an action/stealth possibilities, but at the end of the day, it's about immersing you in a whole different world, a whole different life. How you approach that freedom of choice? Because all freedom in games is an illusion.
Yeah, you know, it's none of the games we work on are pure in the sense that they're the ideal. There's an ideal here for this crowd of people, this crowd of developers, where what we'd like to do is put you in a place and let you do what you want at your own pace and have the interactions delight you and have you discover things that we didn't even figure out because they're set up according to general purpose rules. But no game we work on is pure, you know, like Dishonored leaned heavily into stealth, but it was not a contiguous space. You went and did a mission in one part of town, but then there was a transition, a loading back to your boat or back to your base, you know, your pub. And then later some time passed and you're loading into another space, and it wasn't contiguous. Whereas the team in Austin at Arcane, they worked on Prey, and one of the goals for that game was contiguous space. And so none of our games are but Prey, while it had contiguous space and time, and it had heavy emphasis on physics, it had less focus on stealth, and there were, you know, fewer living people in the world, that sort of thing. So none of the games we've done is a sort of pure, but there is this ideal that we're all trying to reach, which is we put you into a simulated environment that feels plausible, feels realistic, and then we let you do your thing. And then some of them, we drop some of the elements. We focus on other things, like I said, physics and Prey, stealth and Dishonored. But they all share this overlapping core of like, what would it be like to be in this place? How can we fully realize this place so that you feel like people live there? And there are techniques for that, and there's intuition for that, and you can never get it exactly right. You have to downplay some elements in order to have other elements in the game. But I think that's the main answer to the question, is that we start with this ideal that what's fascinating to us is to put you in an environment and let you play with it.
Then it's about starting from a big concept or a big place, if you want to call it that way, and sort of deducting what you should be able or what it would be cool for you to do in that space, right? Rather than just overlapping system and seeing where that leads you.
Right. It's a process of curating all of that. Like, where is the emphasis? You know, is the emphasis on the place, or is the emphasis on the characters you're interacting with? Theme actually drives a lot of it. You know, like, what is the theme in the game? If you look at, again, I didn't work on Prey, but I love Prey because it's an Arcane game that I didn't work on, so I get to play it and analyze it from a distance. I'm working very closely right now with Susan Kath and Ricardo Bear and a lot of the people from the Austin studio, and they worked on Prey. And Prey's themes are all about empathy. Is it possible to develop empathy for another person? Of course it is, but what if you met an alien that seemed incapable of empathy? Should you destroy it, or should you try to teach it empathy? And so the themes, the literary themes, sometimes drive what you want to model, what you want to simulate, what kind of systems you want to have in the game. With Dishonored, it was all about wealth inequality, who has the power, who does not have the power. And so, like, that's played out both in the narrative, where there are people living with gold-plated bathtubs and other people living in the alley behind the house. But it also plays out in the systems. When you have the power, do you use it to inflict damage, or do you quietly slip past? You're very powerful when when no one's aware of you and you're sneaky, and you are less powerful when they see you and you're surrounded by 5 or 6 guards. So the power inverts. Dishonored was all about inequality and power at some level. Who has the cure for the plague and who doesn't? Prescient. It's so funny having worked on 2 big plague games. You know, Deus Ex 1 and Dishonored are all about the plague, and now we're living in this lockdown, this pandemic, and it's kind of haunting in a way. But that's an aside. So yeah, you decide what to simulate, what to model, what to build your game systems around. If it's a dating game in an immersive sim environment, you could do that easily. If it's a stealth game or a physics game or whatever the subject matter you want to go deep on, even if it was mixing chemistry and you're in a lab, there's all kinds of different things you could simulate. But you start with that ideal. You put the player in the situation, then you decide what the game is about thematically and in terms of systems, narratively, etc.
Mm-hmm. We have mentioned Dishonored a couple of times now, and now that the generation is ending, there's a lot of my favorite games of this generation on social media. Mm-hmm. And Dishonored 2 is a very common game in the top 3s or 5s of everyone. How do you think is standing the test of time?
Well, we still talk to a lot of people, especially in Europe, who love Dishonored. And one of the things I'm proudest about is that it's loved by people who like action games, but it's also loved by people who like the art or the setting, or the fact that Emily is the main character in the second game, the sort of empathy for her even in the first game as a child. We have older characters in it, so it feels representational to a wider group of people than you normally would have with just a straight up shooter or action game. I've had so many people come to me or Raf and say, thank you for putting this in the game or that in the game, and handling the subject matter well. So I think that lends itself to it. It's not just another action game about, exacting revenge. It's a little deeper than that. The themes resonate, what would you do if everything was taken away from you? Would you just lash out in revenge, or would you and then you see what it's doing to the young girl that's in your care, the child that's in your care, and then you realize maybe I need to not do that. But also the art style. The artists are so talented at Arcane, and the fact that it's stylized means that it doesn't get dated very soon. It's a style that 10 years from now you could look at this game and probably it doesn't look dated. It doesn't look like inferior because of the technology advancing. There may be some of that, but still this sort of painterly impressionistic style lasts longer.
Talking about creative decisions, what brought you to that art style? I know it's not your department, but you were leading the whole game, the whole project. So I'm guessing that your tastes, up to some extent, shape how your team works and the kind of decisions that are reached.
Yeah, I can't take any credit for that other than loving stylized art. There are times when I love photoreal attempts at games, but really style is where it's at. And if a game has its own style, I think it was my friend Lulu Lemaire who was an external producer, I think, on one of the Borderlands games. And she said once they adopted that art style that it has, you could tell when an asset is complete. And before, when it was sort of more photoreal, somebody would make something, and then later somebody would make something else slightly more real, and then you want to go back and update this one. But as soon as you have an art style, that's very easy to nail down. So there are many reasons people arrive at an art style. It's not dated as easily. It's easier to see whether the team over here that made the fire extinguisher and the team over here that made the chair, do they go together in the same world? There are lots of reasons, but really we just love stylized art. We love it when a game has a look and feel. And our game was set in, like, let's say mid 1800s, an approximation of Europe. It's a fantasy world. It's a steampunk gas lamp kind of world, but it's an approximation of Europe. And it's just impossible when you're working with Sebastian Mitton and Victor Antonov and all the artists. I could name so many people in Lyon with this background in classic art and all these years and years of looking at things and working on art, and they live around this great architecture. Like in America, we're a younger country. Things are mostly built out of wood. We burn them down or tear them down every few years and rebuild them in a new way. But when I lived in Lyon, I lived in an apartment building that was hundreds of years old. And just walking through the city, past the Roman ruins, past the French stuff that had been there for 500 years, like it was, it's beautiful and it puts a mark on you. And so I feel like Dishonored was born from the collaboration of a bunch of people that wanted to make an immersive sim, but updated with a stylized art sense, and they were influenced by this architecture. So it was definitely driven by the artist, but Raph and I, of course, we love stylized art. And so having a look and feel, kind of gritty, nasty, impressionistic. We're in the middle of the plague and people are poor and dying, but the city is kind of beautiful in a way at the same time, even when it's flooded and ruined. I wouldn't change that for anything.
Talking about how games stand the test of time, you worked as lead designer, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the most influential games ever made, Deus Ex. Were you aware in some way when you were working in that game that it was different, that it would make a difference and make a dent in the story of games?
We were very ambitious, for sure. We always we wanted to do things the way we wanted to do them, whether the budget worked out for that or whether the technology worked out for that, because the game was late, needed more time. The technology on some PCs didn't run very fast. The frame rate on the levels I worked on was very low because I did Liberty Island and some other stuff. But our ambition was like, no, I want a big open space that the player can explore. It can go one way or the other. And you have to remember, this was like a team effort. And I think the team was like 20 or 30 people. It's a tiny team by today's standards.
By today's standard, that sounds like an indie game.
Yes. I know indie teams that are bigger than that, right? But I think we had, under Chris Norden's leadership, technically, I think we had, and he accomplished miracles, but I think we had 3 programmers. So just like by today's standards, it's wild to think about that. And you have to remember, it was literally 20 years ago that we signed the game off. So memory is difficult, but I remember us really wanting to do something cool. We come from a school of thought that's like the video game filtered through the lens of the dungeon master, through the game RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, not computer RPGs like with the Japanese computer RPG lineage or whatever, but rather through the lineage of pen and paper games where expression is the key, exploration, doing it your way, finding many different ways to do it. And so we definitely had ambitions, and things came together quite late. Like even at final, the game was in parts was just garbage, and then we got 6 more months, I think, and we revised a bunch of stuff, and we were thankful for that time. I think every great game I've ever worked on has gotten more time near the end, just to like look at what is weakest in the game and fix it, and look at what is best in the game and double down on it. And so we had no idea, of course, that people would still be talking about the game 20 years later, even though we were ambitious and wanted to do this thing with games where we put you in the environment and let you do your own thing. But very happy that it has had such an impact. I got a question yesterday or no, last week from a Russian fan out of the blue, contacted me on Twitter and asked me why the kill switch idea for Gunther Hermann and Anna Navarre, where instead of fighting them in conversation, because they're half cyborg, you can say this kill switch line that automatically shuts them down and kills them. And I think I pitched that idea because I was reading some cyberpunk fiction at the time or something. But Sheldon Picotti did brilliant work with it. He was the final writer on the game, and he rewrote every word, I think, of it. And he just like is a huge part of why the game is remembered so fondly. But the Russian fan asked me why we chose Laputin machine for one of the kill switches, and it's like I had to like the foggy memory about like why did we choose that? Oh yeah, and I had to research a little bit, and then I answered the guy. But the fact is that 20 years later, people are asking these obscure questions about some character, some interaction, or something that moved them or made them laugh, or that they remember. Trying over and over to save Paul Dent and your brother, which you can do. Some people just assume you could not. But when the attack comes and he tells you to go out the window, you can stay in and actually save him. One of the level designers worked very hard to make that work. But yeah, it's left a mark on people, and I love that, and it's gratifying.
Several of the games you worked in at the start of your career are cyberpunk themed. Of course, Deus Ex, but it's not the only one. And now we look back at what cyberpunk said as a genre 20 years ago, and it's like, yeah, we are there. Now it's not science fiction anymore. How does it feel? From your point of view as a creator, you try to avoid politics because that's like a nasty word in games, or it permeates everything you do, just in movies or comics or whatever?
Yeah. Well, first of all, politics is critical thinking. Like you have to know about politics. You have to, your work is infused with politics, whether you want it to be or not. Even the people who say, no politics in our games, bullshit. There's politics in your game. There's a military briefing and a $1 billion military effort behind the characters, and they're being deployed to a land to like shoot some terrorists or whatever. And the only one side of the story is being told, and you think there's no politics in your game. You've got to be kidding me. So there's politics in everything. Politics is all about who has the power and how it's distributed, who gets to say, as you know. But it's interesting because Dishonored, like I said, is about inequality and what you do with power when you have it. Do you make everybody around you suffer, or do you like try to get through with as little chaos as possible, but not giving up on your values and not giving up on what you want to accomplish, putting you in tricky moral situations, and of course, like I said earlier, Deus Ex was, people have sent me since the pandemic started so many times the opening to Deus Ex where, Bob Page is talking about the virus spilling out into the streets, and Dishonored, of course, being all about the rat plague. those things are very resonant. Cyberpunk was just in the air at the time. Like, I think when I started on with the team on that Warren had built together for put together for Deus Ex, it was 1996 or 97. We were all reading Snow Crash. I think Neuromancer came out the year that I graduated high school. I will say that it's very tricky with some of those things because there is the aesthetic layer of Cyberpunk where it looks like Cyberpunk because the guy's got a blue mohawk and he has like a little jack on the side of his head. But then there's also the thematic layer, which is like, if you allow the consolidation of power, it will do the rational thing for making more money and keeping the people in power. And it's often at the expense of everyone else, often at the expense of the things that make us human, often at the expense of like the good things in life, the pleasant things, the non-transactional things. And so standing up to that is a punk effort. It's saying, no, fuck you. That's not the way I want. I don't want to live every hour of my life working for some corporation. I want to take walks in parks, even if parks aren't particularly profitable. And that's a rebellious act. And I think that's got to be at the heart of Cyberpunk. If you work on Cyberpunk, you need to hang on to that.
Wow, that was very interesting. You're co-creative director of Arcane Studios, right? So you've got quite an important leadership position. I would like to know, what's your approach to leadership in that sense? How do you try to shape the efforts of your team?
Yeah, I don't pretend to be a guru there. I make mistakes all the time. My personal approach is, like we have, it helps to elevate the creative, I think. Like if marketing is the point of the whole exercise, or if making money is the point of the whole exercise, those things are important, of course. If showcasing new technology is important, if any of those things are leading the exercise, I feel less comfortable. The gameplay experience, the player's experience has to lead the effort. And that is a principle of mine that is, I don't talk in terms of vague general leadership principles that you could apply anywhere. But in my area, I think that player experience creative part has to lead the whole effort. And I think that's one of the tenets that drives everything else, right? So sometimes that means you can be soft and squishy as a leader, and other times it means you have to be like ironclad. This is where we're going. You have to have some sort of vision. It's messy sometimes. I also think having a set of tenets, like just writing them down, like here are the 8 creative pillars or cultural pillars for our company, so that you can point back to them and other people can point back to them and say, you said this is important to our company. We're not adhering to that. Oh yeah, we can make a shift then. I'm also more democratic than a lot of people. At the end of the day, I have vision and I drive toward that vision, but the vision is often shared by a little group of people that I trust. But then some of our best ideas come from like animator number 4 or programmer number 3 on the team, who's like part of a little strike team driving that effort. And they just like, because they're in it and because they're thinking about it, they're going to surprise you and come up with the idea. So escape the tyranny of the idea and be a lot more democratic. There's a bar that you can hit personally, and then there's a bar that your team can hit, and it's always greater than the bar you can hit, and you have to acknowledge that.
Sounds much more like directing an orchestra than leading an army.
Yeah, sometimes.
How's the daily life of your studio right now? Because I'm guessing that it's a mix of remote work and actual work in the office, so it's a bit like juggling, I guess.
On when was it? March 13th, Friday the 13th, we rolled everybody out. We met in the kitchen and we said, guys, this could last 2 weeks. This could last 2 months. It could last 6 months. Who knows? We will we're taking take your computer home. IT's working, production's working to get everybody rolled out. We're gonna if you write code, you can check it in remotely. If you do art, you can check it in remotely. We're gonna have meetings every day through video conference. But we'll see how this goes, and laughing it off because hopefully it won't get very serious, and we'll all be back in a month or whatever. And I have not personally seen any of my coworkers since then, with like a couple of exceptions. Sound guy Ben came over to my backyard to record some chimes I have hanging in the tree because he wanted to use the sound of the chimes in the game. So this is a small spoiler about the kind of game that we're making. It can have wind chimes in it. But
Okay.
other than that, I haven't seen anybody. We've all been working remotely and doing this all day, and it is really exhausting. It's as you well know, probably it's just like very much every day is the same, and it feels like 1,000 years have passed. So I think the person of the year is got to be the scientist, the epidemiologist, because we all are waiting on this virus against this cursed or this vaccine against this cursed coronavirus. But yeah, it's been really a challenge. I mean, hats off to our producers because the producers and the leads have really made it work. All this communication and all this remote development. And what's funny is like a lot of people in the world would have said before, like you can't make video games unless you're in the office together. And then like, boom, we're all at home working on video games. So I guess we've proven that it can work, even if it's a little slower.
Do you think some creative spark is lost in this situation?
Oh, definitely. My friend Susan is our business manager, our former executive producer. She's worked on the Dishonored DLC and on Prey, and she's a big part of what we're doing now. And she always uses the term drive-by development, where like, you're walking down the hall with your coffee and you pass some people sitting there and they're talking about something and they grab you. Hey, do you have an opinion on this? Or do you want to look at this? And in 3 minutes, organically, you look at it, you react to it, you give some feedback on it, you take it in a completely different direction, or you validate that direction. Or they give you an idea that you're like, I need to go talk to these other people and tell them this is the way we're going now. And there's an energy to it. I go to lunch almost every day with coworkers, and during lunch, inevitably, we talk about the game. We talk about what we'd like to see in the game. And all of that is lost. You can try to make up for some of it, but it's not the same as being, in this physical space with someone.
Mm-hmm. If you had to make a small game, an indie game, all by yourself, 5, 6 persons in your team, very limited budget, what kind of game would you do?
Oh, I fantasize about that all the time.
Do you miss that? Do you miss not leading a huge team?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, this is funny because Rafael Colantonio and I are still very good friends, even though he went indie with his company. They're working on Weird West, Wolf-Eye, that's the name of the company. And we have some of the same problems, even though I'm working with, hundreds of people and he's working with, I don't know how many people he has, 20 or 30 or something. Because as you scale up, you want to do more, and then you end up with the same problems. However, it is a lot easier to turn the smaller ship than the bigger ship, right? It's quicker, it's more agile. So if I was working with a smaller group, if I could ever figure out how to do that, I mean, I'd probably stay at Arcane for 10 more years if I could. But if I couldn't, I would love to make like a fish tank style simulation where there are entities in an environment, whether it's a fish tank or an island or whatever, and they behave according to certain rules, and you can like repress some life forms or elevate some or change them and reach a state of equilibrium or let one group thrive or something. Those kind of games, those simulation games that we used to see from people like Will Wright, I really miss some of those. And I would kind of like to mix a little bit of the values that I have with some of those, the natural ecology kind of stuff. I would really like to work on one of those. Of course, I also still, to my heart, is the pure immersive sim which is very hard to pull off in a very big game. You have to have some mix, like Dishonored leans towards shooter and stealth, and Prey leans a little into shooter as well. But if I had the chance to just make like a very tiny, contained, immersive sim where you were very player paced and all, and you could experiment and explore, I think I would love that as well. But those two come to mind.
Thank you very much, Harvey, for your time. I hope you had a good time, and I hope I can see you again soon here in Bilbao.
I would love to visit again. Stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe and have a great weekend. Bye, Harvey.
You too. Bye.